Chapter 438. Invitation the Royal Family. Klein held the letter he received from Isengard Stanton and silently murmured to himself. He looked up and outside the window, and he saw the rain pattering down. The gas lamps on the streets were giving off quiet halos. Inside the living room, the coffee table was neat and tidy, with a few stacks of newspapers placed in the corner. There was silence all around him. Klein sat on the sofa as he leaned forward a little. He sat there silently for a long time. After nearly 10 minutes, he exhaled and shook his head. Slowly and heavily, he tossed the letter into the trash can. He slowly stood up and expressionlessly walked to the second floor. And in the trash can, Isengard Stanton's letter caught fire silently and quickly crumpled into black ashes. On Monday morning, Klein stood in front of the mirror, pressed his right thumb and middle finger to his temples, and rubbed them with a little more strength. When he was done, he turned on the faucet, lowered his body, splashed the cold tap water onto his face, and washed his face while having a fit at the cold. After freshening himself up, he hung up the towel, walked to the first floor, and simply made a single-sided well-done fried eggs with buttered toast. Of course, a cup of black tea with a few slices of lemon quenched his thirst and reduced the cloy sensation he was feeling. After breakfast, as he was idly flipping through the rest of the newspapers, Klein suddenly heard the tinkling of the doorbell. Who is it? A new commission? Could it be that the machinery hive mind has already finished exploring the Amon family's tomb? No, it can't be that fast. Klein muttered as he put away his napkin and newspapers and walked slowly to the door. When he held the handle, the image of the visitor outside the door appeared in his mind. It was an elderly gentleman dressed to a T. His snow-white shirt was starched, and a thick grayish-blue vest completely hid his belly. The long tailcoat had sharp lines without any blemishes on it. The gentleman was wearing a pair of shiny leather shoes, so shiny that it was impossible to tell if he had walked through the rain or mud. He wore a pair of white knitted gloves, with silver hair at his temples. His face was deeply wrinkled, and his light brown eyes were so serious that they didn't contain a hint of a smile. I don't know him. Klein mumbled and opened the door. May I know who you're looking for? He asked politely. The elderly gentleman took off his hat, pressed it to his chest, and saluted in the most standard manner. Mr. Sherlock Moriarty, I'm a butler who has come to invite you in place of my master. Do I know your esteemed master? Why is he looking for me? Klein's head was completely filled with questions. But at this moment, he had already noticed a carriage parked across the cement road. It had a deep black outer shell, and there was a curtain on the inside of the window. It was obvious that it was nothing ordinary. There's luxury amidst being low-key. Klein looked closely and suddenly saw that there was a coat of arms in a conspicuous part of the carriage. The main body of the coat of arms was a vertical sword facing down, and the hilt of the sword had a red crown. That's the Sword of Judgment. It's the Sword of Judgment representing the Royal Augustus family. Klein's heart palpitated as he roughly understood the butler's background. Perhaps he's a rather powerful beyonder. Klein made a guess. The professional and stern butler didn't pay attention to his scrutiny. He revealed a polite smile and said, You have never met my master, but in a sense you do know him. You have been providing him clues about the organization that is symbolized by the tarot cards, and he has paid for the money you need. As expected, it's the important figure that Talum mentioned. I've been using false information to fleece for funds and even submitted all the reimbursements that old Kohler required to him. I can't refuse his invitation now, especially when Talum is dead. Klein pondered for 2 seconds and said, Did your master come to me due to Talum's death? Yes, Talum was his friend. He was sad and confused by his death, and he heard that you were there when it happened. The old butler articulated clearly. No, I wasn't. Klein subconsciously wanted to deny it, but he ultimately could only nod. Yes, I saw Talum die in front of me. It's really a sad and regretful thing, the butler said in a sincere tone. Are you willing to accept my master's invitation? Do I have any reason to refuse? That would just make me look very suspicious. I might even be killed on the spot by you. Klein looked at him and said, I happen to have nothing planned this morning. All right then. Mr. Moriarty, please. The old butler bent down slightly, extended his right white-gloved hand, and pointed at the carriage on the opposite side of the cement road. Sigh, I've been trying to avoid getting involved with important figures. In the end, I have no choice but to face the person behind Talum after his death. I wonder if this would attract attention or lead to more in-depth background checks. I have to plan ahead and be ready to give up my identity and this foothold at any time. Also, I need to get the human skin shadow characteristic and the deep-sea Naga's hair and advance to faceless as soon as possible. In that case, my ability to resist risks would more than double. When Klein put on his coat and hat and walked to the carriage with the royal coat of arms, he had already thought of the subsequent developments. At this moment, the servant the old butler brought with him opened the door for him. Stepping on the thick brown carpet, Klein looked at the wooden cabinets containing red wine, white wine, champagne, Lanty, and black rand, along with the crystal glasses. Klein felt rather restricted as he sat by the window. Lanty referred to strong distilled spirits made from pure malt. There were many types, such as the sailor's favorite Lanty proof. The bottles displayed in the cabinets were obviously of high quality. As for black rand, they referred to strong distilled wines mixed with other fermented grains, which, like Lanty, was something unique to Lone. As the carriage drove through the wet streets, Klein asked in passing, "Are we going to Empress Borough?" "No, my master is waiting for you at the Red Rose Manor on the outskirts of Empress Borough." The old butler didn't hide anything. "Looks like this is the royal family's manor." Klein thought for a moment, then he asked with a smile, "Can you tell me your master's identity now?" The old housekeeper's back, which was already straight, became even straighter as he raised his chin. "He is the descendant of the founder and protector. He's the grandson of the Might Wielder, the fifth son of His Majesty, Duke of Lastings, His Highness Prince Edisac Augustus. So it's the third prince, the second youngest prince, but he should be around 21 to 22 years old." Klein recalled what he had seen in the occasional descriptions in the newspapers and magazines at the Quelag Club. The horse carriage passed through one street after another, going from an artificial lake to the northwest. After more than an hour, they finally arrived at an extremely large manor. At the entrance to the manor, Klein was inspected by two soldiers in red military uniforms and white trousers. He didn't hide the existence of his gun holster and revolver. He believed that there were definitely people around Prince Edisac who could tell that he was carrying a gun, and that it easily made things worse if he fooled them with illusions. In any case, the prince knows that I'm a private detective, so his subordinates definitely wouldn't send guests to the police station just because I was illegally in possession of a gun. Klein watched as the soldier took the gun holster and revolver before he was informed to take it when he came out. After two more inspections, Klein followed the old butler, went around the main house, and came to a wide area with hills and flowing waters. The only drawback of this place was that the vegetation had long since withered away in the dead of winter, leaving nothing but desolation. Tap, tap, tap. Several horses came running from the distance and stopped in front of them. A young man in white trousers, high-heeled black boots, a fitted shirt, and a dark rider's tunic nimbly dismounted and walked over. Everyone else followed closely by his side. He removed his helmet from his head and smiled at Klein. "I'm finally meeting you, Detective Moriarty." Upon seeing this, Klein's eyes lit up. It wasn't because of how handsome he was, but because he looked like the Henry Augustus I imprinted on 5-pound notes. Edisac Augustus also had a rotund face and a pair of slender eyes, but he didn't look serious at all. Chapter 439. The generous prince. The scene before his eyes reminded Klein of the romance story which Talem Dumont had told him. His noble friend had fallen in love with a commoner woman and was insistent on marrying her. However, being in the top circle of the aristocracy, the marriage was absolutely prohibited. Talem had been vexed over this matter, and he had even considered the prospect of hiring a murderer, but in the end, he managed to persuade the woman to leave his friend on her own accord. Could the main character of this story be Edisac Augustus? The situation is very consistent in all aspects. As a prince, marrying a commoner is practically treason in this era. Since the founding of Lone, the spouse of a direct descendant of the Augustus family could only be a noblewoman. From what I've just heard, Edisac has brought that commoner woman back. And he has even grounded her as punishment? True love. In a split second, the story of a tyrannical prince and a pitiful frail white flower took shape in Klein's mind. He looked into the distance, enjoying the midwinter scenery. That's not what it really looks like. When spring comes and the grass sprouts, you'll see a golf course of the highest quality. Prince Edisac dismissed the maid, raised his whip, and pointed around. "Golf?" Klein asked, simultaneously knowing the answer to his question. Prince Edisac motioned his guards and attendants away, leaving the old butler and Klein to follow him by his side. He strolled on the desolate plains, chuckled, and said, "Yes, golf. This is a truly aristocratic sport that even the owners of most magazines and newspapers have a hard time getting involved in." Although I don't like Roselle, I have to admit that the fantasy-like ideas he had have given us a world with plenty of fun. If you can figure out the truth to Talem's death, this place will always be open to you. It was indeed Roselle. Klein let out a light breath. Seeing that he didn't respond, Prince Edisac continued to lament. There is much to learn from Roselle in every way, but his attitude towards feelings makes me sick. Of course, this is the common nature and style of most of the Intis aristocrats, and it's also the source of their infatuation with luxury and debauchery in their lives. Looking ahead at the slow stream, Edisac said in a mature tone that was beyond his years, 99% of people are not geniuses like Roselle. In order to succeed and establish a great enterprise, one must first understand what they really want, and for that, they must be willing to pay the price and never turn back while persisting all the way. As he said this, his tone became slow as he laughed at himself and said, "Before this year, I had always thought that I liked the daughter of Earl Hall very much. She has perfect looks, an elegant demeanor, a rich fortune, a distinguished family, and a very powerful father. She's someone that no prince can find fault with, but now I understand that what I'm really attracted to is something that I yearn to have even in my dreams. It's a unique temperament and profound soul born from experience. I'm not saying that Miss Hall is lacking in temperament, but that wasn't what I want, admire, or like. Your Highness, your tone, attitude, and expression are now almost identical to Talem just before he died. Don't suddenly die in front of me. Even if I were to jump into the Tussock River, there's no way for me to prove my innocence. Moreover, hearing much of this makes it easier for me to be silenced. Do you want to tie me to your chariot?" Klein felt a little afraid for some baffling reason. He cleared his throat and took the initiative to change the subject. "Your Highness, with your status and identity, you will certainly not lack subordinates. There are many people who are willing to investigate Talem's death for you, so why do you need me?" Edisac shook his head and chuckled. "As a prince, I have as much power as the little freedom I have. There are many things I can't let the people around me do, as there are too many eyes on me. You're a great detective with brains, and you have a good relationship with Talem. You were there at the time, so I don't think there's anyone better suited than you. Don't worry, if there really is a problem, then I can definitely guarantee your safety." Such a promise is like toilet paper in the bathroom. Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. With Prince Edisac already saying this much, he felt that there was little chance of him leaving Red Rose Manor if he refused again. He could only sigh and say, "Actually, I'm as angry as you are about Talem's death, but reality has kept me calm." Edisac smiled. "What can I do for you?" Talem's hair, either his flesh and blood, plus something he carried around with him. Klein made the request. "Okay, then I'll have these delivered to your house." Edisac agreed at once, and then asked curiously, "That's all?" Klein didn't stand on ceremony. "I will only know what kind of help I need when I have a preliminary lead. Your Highness, it's best that you give me a way to communicate with you. A private detective who frequently visits this manor would definitely arouse suspicion." Edisac nodded and said as if he was prepared, "I'll have someone secretly rent the house next door to you, 13 Minsk Street. When you need to make contact, write a letter to your neighbor about visiting and put it in the mailbox. As for the reward, you should know that I'm not a stingy person, even if it ends in failure. As long as you contribute and take the risk, you will still receive the corresponding income. If you do find out the truth, I'll give you a reward sufficient for your retirement." This prince does things really swiftly and decisively. Retirement, that would be at least 3,000 pounds. Klein secretly sighed. "All right, may the spirit of Talem be at peace in the kingdom of storm and lightning." He bowed. Edisac nodded slightly and instructed his elderly butler, "Take Detective Moriarty out and back to Minsk Street. Why don't you keep me for lunch? Aren't you treating your guest in a little too arrogant a manner? Of course, it probably has to do with it being a long time before noon." Klein silently teased him. He followed the old butler all the way out to the entrance of the manor and retrieved the gun holster, revolver, and the bullets. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein stood at the oriel window and watched the carriage with the royal coat of arms drive away. Sherlock Moriarty might die at any moment if the investigations really goes deeper. Who knows? Someone might be watching me right now. Not for now, since I haven't made any moves yet. Klein frowned and stood still. At this moment, he was extremely eager to advance to Faceless. I can't afford to wait for the machinery hive mind's exploration of the Amon family's tomb. I have to continue trying to buy the human-skinned shadow characteristic via other channels. After all, no one knows how long the machinery hive mind's preparations will take. What if it exceeds a month or even half a year? That's not impossible. They can first send people to guard the entrance and slowly gather the corresponding information so as to be certain that nothing goes wrong. It's not a bad strategy, but that's not something that I can afford to wait for. As thoughts raced through Klein's mind, he made his decision. At 2:45 p.m. he brought his newspaper into the bathroom and actively prepared for this week's tarot gathering. 3 o'clock sharp. A deep red illusory radiance rose as Audrey Hall looked around in a good mood. Last night, she had finally received the Sequence 7 psychiatrist potion formula she had been dreaming of. Her emotions were still a mix of excitement, agitation, and serenity. Furthermore, the psychology alchemists hadn't immediately asked her to make any contributions, claiming that it was an advance. They had full confidence in Miss Audrey's outstanding ability to repay them. No new members. Audrey stood up and gazed at the very end of the long bronze table. She raised the corners of her skirt and bowed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool, good afternoon." Her light and cheerful voice broke the unchanging silence above the fog, and it allowed Klein, who had been feeling a little depressed, to temporarily be rid of the troubles that the outside world had on him. He nodded slightly and responded to the members' greetings. When she sat down again, Audrey brought the other members into view and created a dynamic scene with the previous observations. When bowing, Mr. Hanged Man silently sized up Mr. Fool with inconspicuous curiosity. Then, he looked towards Mr. World in anticipation. In other words, with him having a deep relationship with the Church of the Lord of Storms, he knows about the details of Duke Negan's assassination, and is aware of the appearance of Hero Bandit Dark Emperor. He has the desire to investigate the hidden truth behind this matter. There appears to be an outcome regarding the werewolf beyonder characteristic which Mr. World had entrusted him to sell, and he has also probably found the human-skinned shadow characteristics or the deep-sea Naga's hair. The son's emotions are very stable and relaxed. This means that he believes that the City of Silver surveillance on him has been lifted. What did he rely on to make this judgment? Has he been reallocated to the so-called exploratory teams? Furs is a little depressed despite feeling relaxed. She passed the Abraham family member's test and has become his student, but she was forced to accept something that was disadvantageous to her? Mr. World is as cold and deep as ever. Perhaps when I reach sequence 7 or 6, I'll be able to grasp his emotional changes and thoughts. Well, the Fool is still as mysterious, powerful, and unfathomable. A series of thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind. She looked at the figure shrouded in the grey fog and said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have obtained 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." It was a copy she had requested from the psychology alchemists. However, as she had only mentioned it last night, Escalante only had the time to give her 3 pages in such short notice. "What kind of reward do you want?" Klein asked with a smile. Audrey replied sincerely, "Can you just treat it as the reward for answering my previous question?" As she said this, she had an inexplicable feeling of flaunting herself. Mr. Hanged Man and the rest of you still don't know the existence of the Twilight Hermit Order. Phew, how envious. I wonder what problem did Miss Justice seek guidance for in private. I'll write to teacher when I get back, and I'll ask him if he has Roselle's diary, no, to the outside world, notebook. Furs immediately had the desire and motivation. Under the Hanged Man's suspicious gaze, Klein nodded without any care. Sure. Audrey quickly produced 3 pages of tawny diary entries and passed them on to Mr. Fool. Klein took them and read them. On the first page, it wrote, January 13th, contact with Mr. Dorr stabilized. Chapter 440, Angel Family. Just as Klein picked up the diary, Audrey added, Mr. Fool, I still have 10 diary pages which will be given to you later. It is for the payment for your previous blessing. She repeated her private promise so as to not let Mr. Fool think that she had forgotten about it, and the reason why she had provided payment for the information regarding the Twilight Hermit Order was to first settle the debt, while having the intention to show off a little. The payment for the blessing. Furs ruminated over these words and suddenly realized an important oversight on her part. On the matter regarding the Abraham family, Mr. Fool had sent his angel to help me interfere with the divination. I should have paid an appropriate amount. Oh no, I didn't realize this at all. I thought, like all rituals, that it was the end to it once it was completed. For a moment, Furs fell into a panic. During ordinary ritualistic magic, if one prayed for help from a deity or a corresponding existence, they would perform a sacrifice in advance. Burning essential oils, extracts and herbal essence that pleased the target was equivalent to making an advanced payment, but in the rituals corresponding to the Fool, there were many steps that could be omitted, and the price could only be paid afterward. Sometimes, there wasn't even a need to offer anything. Furs, who was accustomed to the former, ended up only saying a word of thanks. She hurriedly looked towards the end of the long bronze table and earnestly said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, your divination interference had helped me greatly. I will try to find 10 Roselle diary pages as soon as possible as well." Seeing the performance of Miss Justice and Miss Magician, it dawned on Derek Berg that he had found a way to fully express his gratitude. However, the City of Silver doesn't have the diary pages of the so-called Emperor Roselle. Well, Mr. Fool is very interested in history, so I'll have to read more books and records on these. With a thought, Derek made a promise to Mr. Fool who sat high above them. The hanged man watched all this from the side and had no doubt that the Fool had an angel at his service. Any organization should have a character like Miss Justice. The power of a role model is limitless. With a lot of debts to collect appearing out of thin air, Klein happily sighed inwardly. As the high and mighty Mr. Fool, he always found it awkward to directly ask for compensation, and he had always believed that helping the members of his own organization was a normal and reasonable thing to do, without the need for him to make it so reliant on transactions. Thus, he didn't control the world to put on the appropriate performance to remind everyone. Of course, if Justice and the others were willing to provide payment, then Klein had no intention of refusing it. All right. He smiled and nodded before shifting his gaze back to the diary in his hands. January 13th. Contact with Mr. Dorr stabilized. The powerful Beyonder, who's lost in the darkness and trapped in the storm, didn't rush me to complete a complicated and difficult ritual so as to help him return to the real world. He seems to have understood that he has to come up with something that would move me, instead of giving me 3 intangible wishes, in order for me to consider whether I should take the hidden risks of saving him. Mr. Dorr temporarily didn't mention this matter and instead, with great interest, chatted about my tarot card creation. Heh. The word, creation, should be written with quotation marks. From this point, it's apparent that Mr. Dorr is able to make contact with the real world at particular times and through particular methods, and he should be able to observe a lot of details. While talking about the moon card, I thought of a matter Zeratul mentioned. He said that the Life School of Thought worships the moon, but not the Evernight goddess. Yes, I added the second half myself. Hence, I asked the 4th epic expert, Mr. Dorr, about this question. He chuckled and similarly didn't give a direct answer. However, compared to the furtive seer who speaks half-truths, making me want to beat him up, he's a lot more frank. He told me that if he were to choose a card from the tarot cards to represent the Evernight goddess, he wouldn't choose the moon, but the star. That makes things very interesting. I pressed, "Who is the real owner of the moon?" His reply was even more worthy of relish. He said with a laugh that the moon currently has no owner. If I didn't misunderstand him, then he means that the peak of the moon's pathway is empty. The sequence 0 is empty. That's not right. Isn't there a primordial moon? Upon seeing this, Klein suddenly had this thought. He had already anticipated that the moon card didn't represent the goddess. Whether it was the faith of the Life School of Thought, the attitude of the vampires, or the records in the Book of Secrets, they all vaguely pointed out that Evernight wasn't the moon. In contrast, vampire ancestor Lilith and the primordial moon resembled the sequence 0 of this pathway in more ways. According to the City of Silver's history lessons, Lilith had most likely fallen in the Dark Epoch, the second epoch. However, the primordial moon was an existence that people still believed in and sent responses to even to this day. Of course, those who prayed to her wouldn't end up well. Why did Mr. Dorr say that the moon had no owner at the moment? As seen from the Book of Secrets, the primordial moon still existed during the 4th epoch. Klein almost frowned. Soon he came up with 3 guesses. First, Mr. Dorr didn't know enough about the hidden primordial moon, but that was a very low possibility. Second, that the primordial moon was actually the disguise of another deity, not essentially occupying the position of the moon's sequence 0 pathway. Third, that she was a sequence 1 of the moon's pathway or was in disguise and had the corresponding sealed artifact. And one more possibility, It's the response from the moon pathway's uniqueness. Klein muttered silently. The most important Beyonder ingredient in the Sequence 0 potion formula described by the Dark Emperor card wasn't all of the Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, but something called uniqueness. Different pathways had different uniquenesses. A true god was unique. Other than the first guess, the other possibilities aren't small. What is the Beyonder pathway of the moon? Klein turned to the second page of the diary and was lucky enough to discover that it was connected to the previous page. I continued pressing, but Mr. Dorr refused to say more. He thinks that I'll rescue him by whetting my appetite? Dream on. I hid my curiosity and scoffed at Mr. Dorr for not being respectful enough to true gods. He casually replied to me. This is the attitude a fourth epoch noble has to the deities. This guy is too good at acting. However, I really am interested in the nobility of the fourth epoch, so I took the opportunity to ask. Mr. Dorr told me that in the Tudor dynasty, there were 5 noble families: Abraham, Antigonus, Ammon, Tamara, and Jacob. Each family was known as an angel family, and they possessed tremendously terrifying strength. Angel family. Just the name itself raises many problems. It really makes one yearn for it. Mr. Dorr said that the number of angel families in the fourth epoch exceeded the 5. There were the Zeratul and Zoroast family, which had always been loyal to the Solomon Empire. The Augustus, Sauron, Einhorn, Castilla families of the Trunsoist dynasty, and the furtive Anariel and Beria families, as well as the Demonis family which stemmed from a true goddess which was one step up from the angel families. So the last winner of the fourth epoch was the Trunsoist dynasty, but where did their royal family go? The 4 angel families, Augustus, Sauron, and the others, divided up the northern continent. Just as Mr. Dorr said the previous time, the strongest powerhouses in the fourth epoch far exceeds my imagination. However, most of them have been buried in the ashes of history. Even the Sauron family has waned, destroyed by me. In another 1 to 2 millennia, perhaps the Augustus family might no longer exist. Only the true gods appear capable of forever illuminating the real world. Although some deities perished in the fourth epoch, they should only be few in number. This makes me think of something that was previously written in a web novel which I memorized. It can be used here with some changes. Ashes await those who fail to become true gods. After the communication period ended, Mr. Dorr disconnected. He's like a prisoner who's released on parole for a fixed period of time. And he does know a lot. When he mentioned the Zeratul family, there was faint contempt in his tone. Perhaps I need to maintain my relationship with Mr. Dorr. Apart from the Church of the God of Steam, Zeratul, and that secret and ancient organization, I should leave another outlet. Unlike the saying, a wily hare has far more than 3 holes. When Emperor Roselle was struggling in the end, he was only thinking about the organization that's suspected to be the Twilight Hermit Order. He didn't mention Mr. Dorr at all. Something apparently happened in between. So the ancestor of the lone royal family, the Augustus family, was actually so rich and powerful to be an angel family. However, why did the royal family of the Trunsoist dynasty, to which they were loyal to, disappear, just like that? Klein suddenly thought of a few things, and his desire to clear away the fog that shrouded the history of the fourth epoch and see its true appearance grew. This was also the greatest hobby of his body's original owner. Perhaps, that underground relic with 2 side-by-side seats and a terrifying evil spirit will help me answer a lot of questions. Klein lowered his gaze and flipped to the 3rd page. June 2nd, Bernadette massaged my back. It's good to have a daughter. She knows to care for her old father, and although I can see what she wants at a glance, at least she's willing to put on an act. Besides, she did a good job. I asked her which Beyonder pathway she wanted. She said she was undecided, but she liked the maxim of do as you wish, but do no harm. June 3rd. I saw Florin again. He's very different from before, as though he's a different person. No. He still had his original memories and some of his distinctive characteristics, which is enough to prove that he's him. What exactly happened to him to experience such a huge change? Perhaps a metaphor could be used to describe it more precisely. Some monsters are physical sutures, while he is a monster of mental sutures. June 5th. I obtained an ancient book. It actually mentions the primordial Demonis name, not one of an honorific name. Her name is Cheek, but that's a man's name. Is this ancient book fake? Chapter 441. Channels increase cheek? Was the primordial demoness also a man in the past? Klein almost raised his hand to his chin. He had once guessed that it was because of the existence of the evil goddess, the primordial demoness, that led to the assassin pathway having members of the opposite sex turn into a female after sequence 7. Who knew that Roselle's diary would indicate that the primordial demoness might have been a male in the beginning as well? This depicted two problems. First, the primordial demoness wasn't a naturally born deity, and they had only relied on potions to reach sequence 0. Second, the purely feminine changes in this pathway were inherent in its Beyonder characteristics. Roselle had once speculated about the truth behind the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation. He suspected that all Beyonder characteristics originated from the original creator, so there's no increase, and that the total amount is conserved. Assuming that this is true, does this mean that the creator who created everything is all-inclusive, masculinity, femininity, and gender-neutral all in one? And the demoness pathway is a representation of pure femininity? Of course, that ancient book might actually be fake. There's a lot of information in Roselle's diary entries today. With thoughts flashing through his mind, Klein let the diary disappear in his hands. You can begin, he smiled and said to Justice, the Sun, and the others. Alger looked towards the world immediately. Your werewolf characteristic has been sold. An artisan paid 1,200 pounds for it. According to our agreement, I will receive 200 pounds. Also, I found clues to the hair of a deep-sea naga. 100 pounds a strand, and you want 5 of them in total. If you're fine with this deal, then I will complete it as soon as possible. Klein had promised a higher share of the werewolf's Beyonder characteristic because he knew that the hanged man had spent more effort and taken on a risk that far exceeded what vampire Emlyn White had spent. At this point, he thought for a moment and controlled the world to reply. No problem. Give me the 5 strands of deep-sea naga hairs and 500 pounds in cash as soon as possible. Now, only the human skin shadow characteristic remains, and the amount of money I have has increased to 1,235 pounds, which isn't enough. If I don't want to wait for the machinery hive mind's exploration of the Amon family's mausoleum, I'd have to wait to receive another 500 to 1,000 pounds before I can buy it immediately when I see it. Klein subconsciously wondered what other items or knowledge he could use to exchange for money. Of course, this was on the premise that the target of these transactions was able to pay the remuneration in cash. Hearing this, Audrey raised her hand very slightly, and without hiding anything she said, I'd like to purchase 3 ingredients, a pair of eyes from a mirror dragon, 50 milliliters of its blood, as well as a fruit from the Tree of Elders. Miss Justice has gotten the formula for the psychiatrist potion. Klein made this judgment in an instant, and the hanged man came to a similar conclusion. I will write to my teacher and ask him if he has one of these ingredients. First thought for a moment. Derek nodded and said, I'll also take note. Corroded mirror dragons aren't rare. Same for the Tree of Elders. In the City of Silver, there's also the Beyonder characteristic left behind by a psyche analyst. However, it's hard to make transactions for them, and it's easy to be suspected. Psyche analyst was the ancient name of psychiatrist. When their conversation reached Klein's ears, he immediately manipulated the world and made the dummy hoarsely and gloomily say, I'll ask around in my circle. All right, continue helping me find the human skin shadow characteristic. All right. Audrey confidently turned her head to face the person opposite her. Mr. Hanged Man, I'll also look out for the wind-blessed potion formula you need. She had already joined the psychology alchemists and had a secret organization backing her. With them, many ingredients were no longer in short supply. She could obtain them as long as she paid the necessary price. Furs repeated, I'll write to my teacher and ask. Upon seeing this development, Klein felt rather gratified. After a long period of hard work, the Tarot Club had finally developed 2 major channels, the Psychology Alchemists and the Abraham family. Many things would become simple. The world chuckled and said, Your answers fill me with hope, but you must also take care to protect yourselves, and proceed in a way that would avoid arousing suspicion as much as possible. Mr. World, you rarely talk so much. Audrey smiled in reply. I got a little too pleased and momentarily forgot the world's original character profile. Klein immediately remedied the situation and made the world chuckle and say, All of you have become sufficiently valuable. I hope that this kind of transaction can last for a very, very long time. That's why I'm reminding you. Thank you. Audrey gracefully expressed her gratitude. At that moment, Derek hesitated and said, I'll give it a try as well. I've recently completed several patrol missions, but there's nothing out of the ordinary. Very good, Klein said to himself, making the world shut his mouth. After a brief moment of silence, Alger looked thoughtfully at Miss Justice. I would like to know the details of the assassination of Duke Negan. What kind of reward do you need? Why ask me? As someone close to the Church of the Lord of Storms, shouldn't you already know the full details of this case? Audrey was surprised for a moment, but then she understood the meaning of Mr. Hanged Man's words. He wants to ask about the organization or force that instigated the Desire Apostle, but he doesn't think it's right to ask the fool directly, thinking that it would be too sudden and invasive. So he took a roundabout way by asking me to open up the topic, gently shifting the focus to the things he wants to know. He knows that I'm a noble lady and that I should pay attention to the assassination of Duke Negan. So he's not worried that I won't answer him. Mr. Hanged Man is really experienced, Audrey said with the corners of her mouth curling up slightly. No, there's no need for compensation. Isn't it the purpose of our tarot club to freely exchange common knowledge amongst each other regarding their respective regions? Only by doing so can our tarot club expand at a rapid pace. She thought to herself, quite possessively. Your words shame me. Alger was stunned for a moment before he pressed his hand to his chest and leaned forward a little. Klein, who was shrouded in the thick grey fog, inwardly laughed dryly. Audrey lightly pursed her lips, weighed her words and said, The Desire Apostle used a unique situation to complete the assassination of Duke Negan, by using his ability to trigger intense emotions and desires, and at the cost of serious injuries. He successfully broke out of the encirclement, entering the sewers. When the Nighthawks caught up to him, he was already dead. The hero bandit Dark Emperor was present. This gentleman didn't do it to silence him, but to target the organization that entrusted the assassination contract to the Desire Apostle. Which organization? Just as the Hanged Man was wondering to himself in puzzlement, the fool, who was sitting at the end of the table, silently praised Miss Justice and looked at her. He then gave her a reminder in passing, in the outside world, do not mention the name of the organization or write it down. Why? Audrey blurted out in astonishment. Klein leaned back in his chair and replied in a gentle voice. Any mention of it will be known. Any mention of it will be known. Audrey subconsciously looked at Mr. Fool, only to feel that he seemed to be emphasizing something with his eyes hidden in the fog. Mr. Fool is implying that if it's not in his kingdom or through talking to him, mentioning or writing down the name of the Twilight Hermit Order would allow them to sense it via some means or item. That should be what he means. What an extremely secretive and high-level organization. To a certain extent, it's even more terrifying than the Church of the Seven Deities. And Mr. Fool, our tarot club is looking for them. Audrey instantly felt like she understood a lot of things. She straightened her back and said, As you command. Any mention of it will be known. A secret organization whose name can't even be mentioned? A powerful organization that I don't know of at all. Is this the faction behind the Desire Apostle? Mr. Fool had sent his adorer to search for them? This high-level situation in the world really is more complicated than I thought. There are even more secrets that I have no way of knowing. Alger slightly nodded his head, feeling both shocked and agitated at the same time. At this moment, he had the urge to pay Mr. Fool for the name of the organization. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that there was no need for that. Although understanding the situation involving the higher-level entities would help him perfect his plans for the future and play an important role in certain situations, he, who was currently at the bottom of the mid-sequence levels, had no way of making contact with matters related to the mysterious organization. What he needed the most right now was the formula and ingredients for Wind Blessed, so he had to save up enough wealth for them. After succeeding my advancement, I could seek an opportunity to consult Mr. Fool. Alger made a note of this. Furs was confused by what she heard. Things like the Desire Apostle and the organization in which any mention of it will be known were completely different from what she had read in the newspapers. There are indeed many secrets behind the assassination of a duke. It's a pity that the organization's name cannot be written down. Otherwise, I can use it as the villain of a future novel. It will definitely be a classic. I still owe 10 diary pages and haven't bought the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch. There's no need to spend the money in order to understand such high-end matters for the time being. Well, the secrecy and knowledge circulating in the Tarot Club are 10 times greater than Mr. A's gathering, or more. Furs restrained her curiosity as a writer. As for Derek, he didn't know who Duke Negan was, so he didn't care who was behind the assassination. He sat silently and was reserved, as though he were in class. When the matter regarding the Twilight Hermit Order was over, Furs looked around and probingly asked, "Lady and gentlemen, do you have a way to solve the problem of accumulating too many Beyonder characteristics of the same level?" Chapter 442. Exploration Mission. Alger looked at Furs and returned with a question. "You were forced to drink a second apprentice potion? Why did you figure it out so easily? It's as though you were there to see it." Furs uncomfortably cleared her throat and said, "Yes, let's just pretend that's what happened. What solutions do you have? What do you need me to exchange for it?" Alger glanced at Mr. Fool, but seeing that he had nothing to say, he replied in a calm and low voice, "You don't need payment, because it will certainly not be able to satisfy your needs." Without waiting for Miss Magician and Miss Justice to ask, he casually explained, "High-sequence Beyonders can independently decide whether or not to pass on their Beyonder characteristics to their descendants, and how much they will inherit as a result. Sequence 6 and Sequence 5 will naturally pass a part of it in an uncontrollable manner. Although the quantity isn't a lot each time and wouldn't affect the Beyonder strength, their sequence will regress if they have enough children. Such a child is born with high spiritual perception and a certain level of incomplete Beyonder powers." Audrey suddenly came to a realization, understanding the origins of some special people. The Hanged Man nodded. "Yes, they're equivalent to half a Sequence 9, with a certain amount of characteristics. If they want to become a Beyonder, they can only choose the corresponding path. Of course, such people might not be a result of inheritance. It might be the result of them gaining the blessings of a deity or the corruption of an evil spirit. There are many factors that can cause the same degree of influence. Also, when high-sequence Beyonders have children, they might give birth to someone who's already at Sequence 5. This is one of the rare instances when one can advance without losing control. So that's how it is." Audrey sighed with satisfaction. To her, knowing more mysteries was more enjoyable than getting a nice dress or jewelry. Furs also came to a realization as she pressed, "Then what about Beyonders at Sequence 7, 8, and 9? Theoretically speaking, their Beyonder characteristics will not be passed down to their descendants, but that is not absolute. If there's an excessive amount of Beyonder characteristics, there's a chance for them to be passed down as well. That is to say, if you're pregnant with a child, there's a way to effectively reduce the remnant potion in your body. No, one might not succeed, but 3 or 4 will stand a higher chance." 3 or 4. Furs stared agape. Klein, who had learned all of this general knowledge from Roselle's diary, couldn't help but think of a joke. "Miss Magician, in the future, you can say to your child that you were a free gift from drinking a potion." Although it seems that, according to Mr. Hanged Man, the burden can be reduced the moment a child is conceived. Having a child would still require almost 40 weeks of trouble. No, more than that. It's impossible to leave the child after it's born, right? After grasping the acting method, even if the process subsequently becomes more difficult, 2 months will definitely be enough time to digest it. It might not even take that long. After all, it's just a starting sequence. Furs forced a smile and said, "I understand, the best way is still to rely on acting to digest it." Alger gave an affirmative answer. "That's the case for Sequence 7 and below. After that, digestion would easily take a year or so, 2 to 3 years, and then 5 to 6 years. When that happens, giving birth to a child would be a simpler plan," he added inwardly. There were a few seconds of silence as the two women digested the knowledge they had just gained. This was the first time they had known that having a child had such uses. For Derek, this was common knowledge. He adjusted his posture and said, "I've been assigned another exploration mission." "Where to?" Alger tilted his head and asked. "It's still the half-destroyed temple of the fallen creator," Derek answered without sounding too grave. "It sounds like there's a certain guaranteed level of safety." Audrey didn't interrupt. The Hanged Man pondered for 2 seconds before asking, "Is the Shepherd Elder still in prison?" "Yes. This exploration will be led by the chief." The son didn't hide the facts. "This way, the danger level will be much lower than last time. You can give it a try." Alger couldn't help but look at Mr. Fool once more. Unable to read any thoughts from the other party's blurry eyes, he continued to speak to the son. "This should be your last inspection before the surveillance is completely removed. Previously, the information you made known was that Amon is archenemies with the fallen creator. They wouldn't mind exposing themselves to spoil the other's plans. This time, by heading to the Fallen Creator's Temple for exploration. As long as you don't reveal any abnormalities, the 6-member council will basically determine that you're no longer under Amon's influence. Mr. Hanged Man sure is experienced. It's as if he was planning the operation. Derek kept it in mind before asking, "What else do I need to pay attention to?" At the very end of the long bronze table, the fool, who was quietly watching, opened his mouth. Flesh and blood ravings. Klein had only said 2 words, leaving the Tarot Club members to comprehend them on their own. This was the demeanor of a great figure. The Hanged Man pondered for a few seconds, then he said to the son who had thanked the fool, "In particular, don't look at what you shouldn't, don't listen to what you shouldn't, don't eat what you shouldn't, and don't touch what you shouldn't." "What are those that shouldn't be seen or heard?" Derek asked, puzzled. The Hanged Man said with a deepened voice, "After entering the temple, everything is included." "Then how should I explore?" Derek asked in surprise. The Hanged Man chuckled. "Aren't there other members? Isn't there a chief?" It really is Mr. Hanged Man's style. Audrey subconsciously wanted to cover her face with her hands, but the education and habits ingrained in her had told her that such actions weren't graceful, so she forcefully changed the way she moved, stroking her drooping hair and pushing it behind her ears. The son felt that such a method was quite unacceptable. Upon noticing his reaction, Alger secretly cursed before saying, "What I mean is to listen to your chief's instructions. Only do what he allows you to do. At any other times, do not take matters into your own hands." "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man." The son instantly relaxed. "Phew." Alger exhaled and turned to the woman opposite him. "Miss Justice, I wish to know the political changes in Backland after Duke Negan's passing." Audrey recalled the information she had heard, both directly and indirectly in recent times. Duke Negan's death has divided the House of Lords. Although his eldest son is about to inherit the nobility title and become a member of the House of Lords, his prestige isn't enough to calm the dispute. Nearly 10 members of the House of Lords have jointly proposed that the newly conferred nobility should also have a chance to obtain a fixed seat as a member of Parliament. Simply put, let those who are conferred nobility through political donations, charity donations, and the purchase of land become members of the House of Lords. Hearing this, the Hanged Man Alger laughed. "Aren't nobles with a certain amount of history in their family line the ones who despise such people who rely on unorthodox means to be conferred a nobility title the most? Wasn't the ultimate honor and their greatest pride the fact that a fixed seat in the House of Lords was hereditary?" Ignoring the inadvertent mockery, Audrey calmly explained, "When you have tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds, or even more debts, you will also make the same choice." Owing money wasn't a fatal threat to many nobles, but the debtor could apply to the court and use their lands as payment for the debts. Without the minimum amount of land needed for a noble title, their status as nobles would be on the verge of collapse. And then, Alger didn't continue to harp over the previous question. Audrey gave a rough description. This kind of dispute has put many bills on hold, including, but not limited to, the raising of worker salary, the improvement of working hours, and revising the poor law. It's gratifying to see that the Civil Servant Unified Examination is still progressing steadily and hasn't stopped, and the investigation into the air pollution in Backland is also going in depth. There will be no war for the time being. The Hanged Man whispered, and he went on to talk to the other members. Worried that staying too long in the bathroom would arouse suspicion, Klein announced the end of the tarot gathering after they were done. After returning to her room, Audrey didn't rush to get up. She first quietly sorted out the things she needed to do after this. Looking at the mirror in front of her, she played with the accessories on her earlobes. With a slight smile, she silently muttered to herself, "There will be a psychology lesson tomorrow afternoon. I can tell Miss Escalante that I've met someone in a Beyonder circle who's looking to buy the human-skinned shadow characteristic and has promised an abnormally generous price for it. I wonder if the psychology alchemists will be interested in it or not. Also, I mustn't forget Roselle's diary and the wind-blessed formula. Yes, I have to find the psychiatrist ingredients as quickly as possible. Audrey, you can't be lazy. Susie is already a sequence 8, so you can't let her overtake you." After pacing back and forth in the room, Furs finally made up her mind and pulled out her chair. She grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and, after mulling over it for nearly a minute, began to write to Dorian Gray. She described how she learned of someone who requested the characteristic of a human-skinned shadow and the wind-blessed potion formula, as well as her curiosity over the Roselle notebook. The capital of the Rorstad archipelago, the city of generosity. Alger Wilson walked out of the hotel and headed for a secret underground market. His target was the hair of a deep-sea naga. He had no intention of missing a human-skinned shadow if someone had it. I'm short on money. Klein sat in the living room and sighed again. He still needed quite a bit of cash to ensure that he could purchase the items directly when he received clues regarding the human-skinned shadow's characteristics. Klein thought for a long time, wondering if he should find other channels to sell the Beyonder characteristic left by the interrogator and stop waiting for Miss Zio to save up her money. After an unknown period of time, the sound of the doorbell rang, breaking the afternoon silence. Chapter 443. A one-man performance. The visitor was a man in a dark green postman uniform. He smiled at Klein in a fawning manner. "Are you Mr. Sherlock Moriarty?" he asked. "Yes." Klein could vaguely guess the purpose of the other person's visit. The visitor raised his right hand and handed over a palm-sized item that was wrapped in layers of black gauze. "Please sign and accept your package." Klein deliberately revealed his doubts. "Shouldn't you give me a slip and let me go to the corresponding post office for collection?" The Lone Kingdom's postal system was a perfect replica of the Intis system, and even the flaws were copied quite significantly. Anything that couldn't be stuffed directly into the mailbox, no matter what it was, would only be given a collection slip by the postman, making the recipient go through the hassle of collecting it himself. "Haha, because it's rather precious, so I have to personally deliver it to you," the postman said after a momentary shock. "It seems you're not professional enough to be a real postman." Without further questions, Klein accepted the package, pen, and slip before signing them. He closed the door and returned to the living room. He didn't rush to open the package, but he took out a gold coin and threw it into the air. "Pah!" Klein caught the gold coin and looked down to see if it was heads or tails. A number faced up, indicating a negative response. "There's no latent danger." Klein nodded slightly and put away the gold coin. He touched the paper figurine in his pocket and carefully opened the package. After one layer after another of black gauze was removed, the objects inside clearly presented themselves to him. They were a pale gold-colored, elegantly patterned pocket watch, a handkerchief stained with dark red blood, 7 or 8 brown short curly hair tied together, and a stack of notes. Talam's belongings, his hair, his blood, and his daily records, are all present. Prince Edisac sure is a very efficient man. It's not even night time. Klein looked at the items on the coffee table and suddenly felt that there were many people staring at him at that very moment. An ancient angel family with a heritage of more than 2,000 years would definitely have an unimaginable background. Being involved with the royal family's internal strife makes it possible for me to be pulverized at any moment and anywhere. Maybe I'm already being monitored now. I have to appear mediocre and useless enough to ensure my safety. Klein had already decided what to do, so he took his time checking the pocket watch, handkerchief, and hair. During this process, his spiritual intuition didn't give him any warnings, nor did it prevent him from attempting divination. After having a better grasp on the situation, Klein took out the letter, picked up a pen, and wrote his divination sentence: "The true cause of Talam Dumont's death." He acted big-hearted and poised, as though he didn't feel that he was being monitored at that very moment. Picking up the curly hair and handkerchief, Klein chanted the divination sentence while leaning back against the back of the sofa. His eyes turned deep as he entered cogitation. After repeating it 7 times, he came to the dream world and saw the familiar lobby of the Quelag Club. And then he saw Talam Duman clutch at his heart, his face contorted once again. This revelation shows that Talam did die of a sudden heart disease. Klein opened his eyes and muttered softly to himself. He frowned, wearing a puzzled, confused, and thoughtful expression. He tried several different divination statements and received the same result. He got up and paced back and forth several times. He punched himself in the head, as though he was angry that he wasn't good enough to help his friend or find out who the culprit was. In the end, he dejectedly sat down and didn't move for a long time. In the dark room, he was like the silhouette of a stone statue. That should be enough. I can't go overboard. If there's no one monitoring me, then I would have been fighting with the air just now. Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner, got up, and walked to the kitchen. After dinner, he seemed to perk up again before he read the stack of notes carefully, including what Talam had done and who he had met on the day and the days prior to his death. Home, Red Rose Manor, Quelag Club, Viscount Conrad's mansion. There's nothing out of the ordinary about it. Klein picked up a sharpened pencil and drew circles, marking out the places he would visit and the targets he would ask about in the next few days. After doing all of this, he let out a long sigh. Without confidence, he packed up his things, washed up, and went to bed. In the middle of the night, when the red moon was hidden by layers of clouds, Klein suddenly opened his eyes and woke up. He got out of bed, opened the door slowly, and went into the bathroom next door, hiding himself with a paper figurine substitute in the process. Walking 4 steps counterclockwise, he arrived above the gray fog and sat down at the seat which belonged to the fool. His eyes had become clear, no longer dispirited, dejected, and pessimistic. Soon after, Klein took the blood-stained handkerchief from a hidden pocket in his pajamas made out of old clothes. When he was packing his things, he had used his beyonder powers as a magician to hide the handkerchief on his body. After taking a deep breath, Klein conjured a pen and paper, and he wrote down the divination sentence that was no different from the beginning: the true cause of Talem Dumont's death. After he repeated it 7 times with his body and mind in peace and quiet, he leaned back in his chair with the paper and handkerchief in his hand and fell asleep in the silent and empty old palace. In a gray, separated and illusory world, Klein saw a completely different scene from before. Presented before his eyes was a palm-sized wooden puppet, carved with eyes, a nose, and a mouth. There were a few drops of dark red blood on the puppet's body, giving it a demonic appearance. A palm stretched out. The skin was white and exquisite, smooth and beautiful, with 5 slender and delicate fingers that accentuated the hand's flesh and bones. The most eye-catching thing was a unique ring with an inlaid sapphire on the hand's pinky finger. Pah! The hand's index finger was wreathed in black flames as it pointed at the heart of the wooden puppet. Without a sound, the scene shattered and Klein woke up from his dream. His initial judgment wasn't wrong. Talem had died under a curse. But there was a problem. He had already seen the scene of the curse happening, so why wasn't the scene displayed in its entirety? The mysterious space above the gray fog is able to get rid of all interference. Klein was puzzled for a moment. Normally speaking, receiving a revelation that too abstract and easy to misread was a problem with his limited divination abilities. It meant that the difficulty of the matter he was divining was too high, and that it had nothing to do with the gray fog. It was an understandable outcome, but he had clearly seen the scene of the murderous curse, but he was limited to a small scope of the situation. It didn't provide a relatively effective revelation and was rather baffling. Have I encountered such a similar situation in the past? Klein dug through his past experiences. Suddenly, he sat up straight, remembering a similar experience. In Tingen, when he was divining the real reason behind the countless coincidences, something similar had happened. He could clearly see the house with the red chimney, but he couldn't reach Ensanguil and sealed artifact 0-08. This is the power of someone or something that's at the level of a grade 0 sealed artifact that's resisting the power of the gray fog. Klein's eyes abruptly narrowed. No, not necessarily. There are still quite a few possibilities. I have to confirm it again. He put in a lot of effort in order to calm down. As for the method used for confirming, it wasn't daunting for the experienced him. The method was simple. Redoing the same divination again. If the revelation doesn't change, it means that things aren't so terrible, and if divination is no longer successful, then something around the target or the target is resisting the gray fog to some extent, like 0-08. Taking a deep breath, Klein calmly repeated the previous divination. The true cause of Talem Dumont's death. He leaned back in his chair and chanted in a low voice, his eyes growing darker. In the dream, all he could see was a hazy, shattered gray fog. There were no more wooden puppets or fingers. Whoosh! Klein straightened his back, his expression abnormally grave. What did Talem get himself involved in? He frowned as he muttered to himself. There's no question as to what I should do next. It's to be passive and perfunctory. I'll first lie to Prince Edisac before telling him that I'm incapable of figuring out the truth. Phew, this world is really scary. Just the slightest bit of carelessness would cause me to come into contact with something extremely terrifying. Klein sighed. Without daring to stay any longer, he quickly returned to the bathroom in the real world. Tuesday, 9 a.m. At the Crown Cemetery. Klein stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a black shirt, black vest, and a black tweed coat whilst he was carrying some fresh flowers he bought for 12 soli. He looked gravely at Talem Dumont's coffin being carried over, had his soul put to rest, and was buried bit by bit into the earth. During this process, Talam's mother's eyes were red and swollen. She wanted to speak a few times, but she couldn't find her voice. His father's hair was gray, and his expression was haggard. He just stood there, trembling slightly. When the scene reflected in his eyes, Klein tilted his head back and closed his eyes. He waited until the mourners had left before he walked over, bent over, and placed the white flowers on top of the others. "I'm sorry," he silently said inwardly. Standing up, he stepped aside and was about to leave when Klein noticed reporter Mike and Surgeon Aaron closing in. "What a pity. I never thought that Talam would actually, sigh." Mike's expression was pained as he couldn't finish his sentence. Aaron, who was always cold, took off his glasses and wiped the corners of his eyes. He sighed and said, "He's a warm-hearted guy. He shouldn't have ended up like this." "Yes, he could have gotten rid of his grandfather's bad reputation," Klein echoed. Just then, he saw a female figure in a thick black dress with a veil covering her face walk up to Talam's grave. She, too, was also carrying a bouquet of white flowers. Klein looked away, not paying much attention, just keeping watch through the corner of his eye. The woman bent down to release the flower, revealing her left palm, which was covered by a black gauze glove. A blue gem faintly appeared on the pinky of her left palm. Klein's scalp tingled instantly. His entire body felt numb. Chapter 444. Confession. A similar feeling that wasn't unfamiliar. The experienced Klein immediately used his clown powers to control his facial expression and the slight trembling of his body. Without rushing, he gently retracted his gaze, making the casual glance from before appear normal. Sigh, Talam was so young. He wasn't even married and has no children. Klein sighed as he went with the flow. He had said this because it gave him a plausible explanation for his subtle reaction towards the woman who had offered the flowers. He had turned sad having seen a woman who had some connection with Talam, associated her to marriage and family, and then finally how his friend had passed away at an early age. Yeah, actually at his age, he should have been married 4 or 5 years ago. Unfortunately, the matter with his grandfather left him with an extremely strong psychological trauma. He had always rejected marriage, and only recently did he improve. Reporter Mike sighed. At this moment, the seemingly normal Klein seemed to have a cluster of thorns stabbing at his back, slowly piercing into his skin and flesh, causing him to feel extremely tense. The girl in the black dress with the sapphire ring on her left hand pinky had straightened her body and calmly surveyed her surroundings. Afterward, she quietly left Talam's grave with 2 maids accompanying her. She silently walked further and further away from Talam's grave. Phew! Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The feeling of his back being stabbed quickly turned into a cold sweat. Just who is she, and why did she come to the grave to offer flowers? Talam's lover? However, how could Talam, who had no wealth or status, have a relationship with a terrifying person who is involved with a grade 0 sealed artifact or that of a demigod? This isn't a novel. Furthermore, she should be the one that used a curse to kill Talam. This matter runs deep. Klein listened quietly as Mike and Aaron recounted Talam's past. His thoughts quickly dispersed, feeling that the most puzzling thing about this matter was that Talam's death, an ordinary person who had no money, power, status, or strength, was actually involved with a grade 0 sealed artifact or a powerhouse of the same level. This was simply inconceivable. But this isn't an isolated case. There's another similar case that has happened around me. Klein suddenly thought of something and looked at the surgeon, Aaron. This ordinary person's home might very well be hiding a sequence 1 snake of mercury. Following this train of thought, Klein recalled the nearly 5 months that he had spent here since he transmigrated. He was stunned to discover that he had unconsciously become involved with many demigods and terrifying sealed artifacts. The woman who had killed Talam, the Snake of Mercury, Septon, the blasphemer Amon, the mysterious woman at the Royal Museum, a high-sequence beyonder of the Rose School of Thought, 0-08, 1-42, in Sangwil, the mutated sun's sacred emblem, the Antigonus family's notebook, Mr. Isaac Eggers, who suspected to be a descendant of death, Mr. Dorr, the Twilight Hermit Order. Each name flashed through Klein's mind, and every single one of them made him feel like drawing in a cold breath. He calmed his heart and carefully thought, these don't include the true Creator and the eternal blazing sun, who are ranked high above these. Strictly speaking, I can be considered to be among their ranks. After all, I came from a dark divination, and I'm a strange alternate world soul who controls the strange gray fog. Could this be another crest of the times after Roselle? So all the demigods and terrifying sealed artifacts are making an appearance in real life. As these thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, the grief-stricken reporter Mike and Surgeon Aaron excused themselves. He then left the cemetery at a leisurely pace. Just as he was looking around for a rental carriage, a familiar carriage drove out of a secluded spot and stopped in front of him. Although the coat of arms on the black carriage was skillfully concealed, Klein was still able to recognize it as Prince Edisac's carriage. Without a sound, the door of the carriage opened, and the old butler with his meticulously combed hair alighted. He politely made a gesture of invitation. "His Highness is waiting for you." "All right." Klein didn't feel guilty at all as he entered the spacious and warm carriage. Prince Edisac was dressed in a dark blue coat with a large collar and a golden ribbon across his chest, which made him look very abnormally noble. He rubbed the diamond brooch, and his long and narrow eyes showed hints of a sigh. "I'm restricted even when participating in the funeral of a friend. I couldn't appear in person and could only watch from afar, sending someone to offer flowers for me. This is the royal family's lack of freedom. If Talam's grandfather hadn't lost his aristocratic title, then you wouldn't have to avoid anything." Klein abided by Prince Edisac's gesture and sat across from him. Edisac picked up a cup of blood-red wine and said, "Sigh, I had originally planned to find an opportunity to help Talam's father recover his aristocratic title, but unfortunately," instead of going deep into the subject he asked, "Sherlock, did you receive the package?" "Yes," Klein answered any questions he was asked, never giving any additional descriptions. Edisac nodded slightly. "Any progress?" "I made several divinations using Talam's hair, blood, and belongings, but all of them led to the conclusion that he had died of a sudden heart disease." Immediately, he turned around and went to the steam cathedral in a rental carriage. The cathedral towered over the chimneys and clock tower, the former representing the power of steam, while the latter represented the beauty of machinery through the hanging of its intricate clocks. It was neither the weekend nor noon or the evening, so there were only a few devotees in the hall quietly praying. Klein sat down in the aisle, leaned his cane, took off his hat, and pretended to pray for 10 minutes in front of the sacred emblem. Then, he picked up his things and walked along the aisle to the altar. He said to the bishop standing to the side, "I wish to make a confession." "Good, God is watching you." The bishop, who had a kind face and hoary hair at his temples, walked to the confessional by his side. Klein followed closely behind and closed the door. He sat down on a chair and said to the bishop through the wooden board, "I confess that I didn't adhere to my principles when facing danger, and I chose to retreat." "What were you thinking at the time?" the bishop gently asked. Klein immediately described in detail about Talam's death, his suspicions, the reminder from the machinery hive mind, Prince Edisac's entrustment, and after how he failed to obtain any answers from his divination, he expressed his heartfelt cowardice in the face of the royal family's strife. The reason he didn't go straight to Carlson was that he was afraid that not only was he being watched, but Prince Edisac's men were also watching him from the shadows. Once he made his intentions clear, he couldn't be sure if he would encounter another calamity. The Steam Cathedral was the headquarters of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, and it was one of the 3 great holy temples. No one could spy on whatever happened inside. What Klein intended to do was to use the Church of the God of Steam to convey his true thoughts and avoid getting caught up in a deeper conflict. Simply put, it was to comply with what his heart wanted. The bishop listened quietly and answered without changing his tone, "Your choice derives from human instinct. God will not blame you. Go back, God will protect you." "That's good." Klein understood the hint and quietly left the Steam Cathedral. Standing on the street outside, looking at the misty sky, he sighed silently. "I need to advance as soon as possible." Chapter 445. Live broadcast lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the pitch-black city walls. Carrying a leather bag on his back and the axe of hurricane in hand, Derek Berg stood outside the doorway to a cave with nearly 10 of his teammates. Lifting his eyes up, he saw that between the stone cracks of the city wall, the dry and hardened black soil was crusting, but a bunch of tenacious weeds had grown out. They were densely packed and resembled human hair. At that moment, he hurriedly withdrew his gaze and looked towards the city gate when he heard light footsteps. As the lightning and darkness alternated, a tall figure slowly walked over, carrying 2 straight swords which were crossed on his back. Then his pale, disheveled hair, his ancient eyes, his twisted, deep, old scars, and his perennially unchanged brown coat and flaxen-colored shirt entered Derek and the other's sight. The approaching person was the chief of the 6-member council of the City of Silver, Colin Iliad, a powerful demon hunter. After greeting him, Derek subconsciously looked at the chief's waist. There was a leather belt divided into many compartments, each with a different metal bottle inside. This was a symbol of an experienced and powerful demon hunter. Derek had previously heard his parents mention that demon hunters were good at discovering the weaknesses for different monsters, identifying the uses of various materials, and were able to use their special cogitation state against the former. With the latter, they could concoct corresponding magical medicine, holy ointments, essential oils, and special imprints. Then, through consumption, smearing, and using these items, they could achieve the effect of restraining the target. In a sense, experienced, knowledgeable, well-prepared, and sharp demon hunters were the nemesis of the vast majority of monsters. The amount and variety of small metal bottles at their waist represented their experience. Of course, this was only a portion of the demon hunters' beyonder powers. Just by relying on these, they couldn't be called demigods or saints. Colin looked around and confirmed that all the team members were present. He then said in a low voice, "Light up. Let's go." 2 team members immediately lit the candles in their lanterns, letting the faint yellow light shine through the extremely thin leather. During daytime, when the frequency of lightning was relatively high, there was no need to use candles in the City of Silver as there was illumination every 2 to 3 seconds. Furthermore, the monsters in the nearby area had been cleaned out again and again. However, once they left the City of Silver and entered the darkness, they had to maintain sufficient candlelight. Otherwise, once the lightning failed to illuminate the skies, causing a dark environment that exceeded 5 seconds, there was a high chance for the team to suffer from an assault by certain monsters. Intense fighting wasn't the most frightening development. What Derek remembered so vividly was a story his parents had told him. Once, while they were exploring the depths of the darkness, because of a previous battle with a horde of rotting corpses, the candles couldn't be replaced in time. This led them to endure being engulfed in darkness for as long as 8 seconds. When the lightning flashed again and the candlelight appeared, they were stunned to see that only 5 of their original 8 teammates remained. The other 3 had vanished in silence, never to be seen again. Taking a deep breath, Derek gripped the axe of Hurricane tightly and walked in the middle of the team, following the chief in a predetermined direction. A bolt of lightning flashed, causing the plains covered in tall black grass to appear like an eerie oil painting. The exploratory team of 10 Beyonders walked along the path filled with craggy gravel, venturing deep into the black grass. The lightning subsided, and the dense darkness instantly swept over them, almost completely engulfing them. The yellow candlelight pierced through the leather and weakly swayed to and fro, guarding the surrounding area. Eastborough, in a greasy and cheap coffee shop. In accordance with the previously agreed-upon appointment, Klein found old Kohler, who was applying butter to his toast. He glanced at the crumpled cigarette on the table and smiled. "Newly bought." "No, it's from the past. I haven't smoked since, but I would always carry it with me, occasionally taking it out to sniff at it. Heh, this will remind me of that vagrant life of mine. Back then, I really felt like I could die at any moment." Old Kohler's tone carried a hint of fear. Klein took 20 soldi in change, which he had changed earlier, and pushed it across the table while sitting down. "I was very satisfied with the information from the last time." Without waiting for old Kohler to give a modest reply, he turned his head and looked towards the counter. A loaf of oatmeal bread, 2 slices of toast, a block of butter, a serving of beef stew with potatoes, and a 1-pence cup of tea. "Mr. Moriarty, didn't you have dinner yesterday?" Old Kohler was stunned for a moment as he held the cash. Klein shook his head and smiled. "I'll be very busy later and might not have time for lunch." He needed to pretend that he was active and serious. After all, he had received £100 from Prince Edisac. Old Kohler didn't ask any more questions. He looked around cautiously while stuffing the notes into his pocket. "There are some results from the matter you previously asked me to find out more about. Isaac Eggers's bounty comes from a few gang leaders and some intelligence dealers. Well, I don't know who entrusted the task to them since it's difficult to make contact with them." "Me 9. Klein nodded. "That's enough. There's no need to delve deeper. It's too dangerous." Old Kohler heaved a sigh of relief and said, 2 days ago, someone at a budget hotel on Golden Cloak Street saw someone who appeared to be Isaac Eggers. It said that the person was basically a carbon copy of the picture on the bounty notice. Klein's heart palpitated as he smiled instead of showing surprise. And then? Could it be that the moment I prepared to try for this bounty, the matter is over? And then? With that clue, quite a number of bounty hunters rushed over, but they didn't find anything. Well, they said that there were traces of a fight in the room. Old Kohler tried his best to recall the information he had gathered. The intelligence would definitely be sent to MI9 first. Did Mr. Isaac have a secret standoff with them? I wonder what the outcome was. Klein took a glance at the boss who was coming over with a plate. He pretended to mutter to himself and said to Old Kohler, "Take me to Golden Cloak Street later. Maybe I can find some clues." It was past breakfast time in East Borough, and there were very few customers in the cheap coffee shop. All right. Old Kohler agreed without hesitation. A total of 16.5 pence. The boss placed Klein's breakfast on the table. There wasn't much beef with the potatoes, but the stew was very overcooked. It was obvious that it had been prepared beforehand. The thick aroma tantalized Old Kohler's taste buds to the point that he involuntarily gulped a mouthful of saliva. After paying the bill, Klein picked up a fork and spoon and said to Old Kohler, "Continue. There aren't many people looking for the believers of the fool anymore, except for a few stubborn bounty hunters. Many unemployed textile women, including some male workers, left East Borough." Old Kohler went down a list of matters. What? Klein swallowed the beef and looked up. Left East Borough? They must have found some other job. As for where they went, I couldn't find out, Old Kohler answered truthfully. Their families aren't aware? Klein pressed. Some left with their unemployed family members, while others had come alone from outside the city to search for work. Old Kohler had already done some investigations. Judging from the target's choice, there's something wrong. Klein made a mental note of it and continued to eat while he listened to Old Kohler talk about matters that had happened in East Borough recently. After making an appointment for the next meeting, he put down the cutlery, wiped his mouth, picked up his hat and said, "Let's head for Golden Cloak Street." In the only budget hotel on Golden Cloak Street. After the boss accepted a 2-pence tip, he led Klein and Old Kohler to the room which was suspected to be where Isaac Eggers used to live. There have been many bounty hunters visiting over this period of time. It made me earn quite a bit, so I have maintained its original state. The hotel owner opened the door with his key and pointed inside. At first glance, Klein saw overturned chairs and rags scattered everywhere. There were no other signs of a fight. With his considerable spiritual perception, Klein cast his gaze under the bed. After staring for 2 seconds, he walked over and bent down to pat the bed. Dust flew into the air with a poof as a gray rat jumped out from under the bed. It looked normal without any problems, but in Klein's spirit vision, its aura only had the colors, black and green. The rat turned a corner and climbed up a wall, exposing its belly to Klein's eyes. In that soft spot, its flesh was green with flowing pus. One could see that his internal organs had similarly rotted away. Klein thoughtfully looked back at Old Kohler, who wasn't paying attention to the rat. Has the bounty for Isaac Eggers been withdrawn? No. Old Kohler shook his head in confirmation. Klein examined it again. He then stepped out and said, "Let's go, there's no valuable clues." 15 Minsk Street. Klein, who had been busy all day, lay down on his bed and entered the dream world. Scenes that were continuous at times, and at other times fragmented, swept past and all of a sudden, Klein woke up. He knew that he was dreaming. A power has invaded my dreams. Klein maintained his previous dazed state, casually sizing up his surroundings. He found himself in a suburb of fertile fields. A river flowed over from the distance and made a turn around the cliff in front of him. One side of the cliff was bare, revealing a pure white rock. Looking from afar, it seemed to have a kind of holy beauty. Nearly 10 men and women wearing black coats or dark jackets surrounded a hidden underground entrance to the bay. Among them was Klein's acquaintance, Ekanser Bernard. White Cliff Town. Stratford River Creek. Machinery hive mind. Are they exploring the Amon family tomb? But why would there be scenes of it in my dreams? Klein was puzzled. At that moment, he saw the water on the surface of the river undulate, rapidly forming a line of white words. "Your loyal and humble servant, A. Rhodes, is here to report to you on the exploration situation." Klein's mouth turned agape, momentarily losing the ability to speak. Then, a voice echoed in his head. Tell me, why would a perfectly good mirror be a snitch? Chapter 446. Machinery hive mind's combat style. In an instant, Klein switched to his unfathomable state as the fool who overlooked everything. He nodded and said, Not bad. Ahead of him, the river surged, and the white words squirmed and changed before taking shape again. What follows is the exploration process your loyal servant, a Rhodes, has recorded. You can choose to speed up or skip certain scenes at any time. This sentence froze for 2 seconds, and then the scene abruptly zoomed in. Klein instantly appeared beside a Cancer Bernard, but no one noticed him. He looked around and felt that he was surrounded by living people with lifelike scenes. Nothing about his surroundings looked unreal, making him feel as if though he was there in person. I can even speed up or skip certain scenes. The original form of this mirror, a Rhodes, is a virtual reality family cinema. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. He took another look at the machinery hive mind members and saw that it was led by an old man in white priest robes and a cleric cap. His face was unusually kind, and his expression was calm and gentle. Your Grace, everyone is ready. A Cancer approached the elder and said with a bow. Archbishop. This is the Archbishop of the Church of Steam and Machinery's Backlund Diocese. The demigod, Horamic Haydn? The machinery hive mind really is cautious, and not careless. Who knows, they might have even brought along a Grade 1 sealed artifact and performed a divination in advance. After all, they're in control of the mystery prior pathway. Luckily, I can basically confirm that the fog's anti-divination or divination interference abilities are similar to the cards of blasphemy, allowing the result to be as ordinary as possible and the least bit suspicious. Otherwise, certain matters might be exposed. However, there's a certain probability that the meeting between Miss Sharon and I will appear, because, to me, that isn't something harmful. It depends on whether a wraith's instinct to interfere with divination will affect the machinery hive mind's attempt. Wait, the machinery hive mind is highly likely to have relied on a Rhodes, and based on its performance from just now and previously, it isn't impossible for him to curry favor with me by adding some mosaics. Klein thought in enlightenment. At this point, Horamic Haydn drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. Begin the operation. God will protect us. Nearly 10 Beyonders headed down as Klein followed closely behind. He didn't fast forward at all. He had always been curious about the combat styles of low and mid-sequence Beyonders of the machinery hive mind, and he wanted to take this opportunity to experience it. In addition, he was also greatly concerned about how a demigod really did in combat, as well as the secrets hidden in the Amon family tomb. There's more. Klein felt a little numb from what was happening. The second group was also made up of 2 team members who used scrolls made of different kinds of leather. They chanted simplified incantations, activated the scrolls, and tossed them inside. The construct behind the stone door was suddenly shrouded by gentle and pure light. Droplets of golden holy rain pattered down, cleansing everything in the area. Klein looked at this scene and suddenly found it somewhat ridiculous. Wait, aren't you guys here to engage in archaeological studies? Aren't you professional archaeologists? Aren't you afraid that the tomb would collapse from using such cleanup methods? While these thoughts flashed through his mind, the second team was done, and they shouted at a Cancer. Deacon, as expected, the construct's structural integrity hasn't been destroyed. They were clearly prepared. All right, continue forward. A Cancer gave the order. Klein walked in the middle, through the stone door, and saw piles of dirt and debris on the ground. It was impossible to tell what kind of monsters had once been active here, and no one could guess the functions of the mechanisms that had been set up here. After these cleaning up procedures, as long as one didn't dodge in advance, no Beyonder below that of high-sequence Beyonders would be able to withstand it. Klein once again gained a deeper understanding of what the aesthetic of violence was like and what it meant to be simple, direct and unreasonable. In what followed, the previous scenes were repeated over and over again. The machinery hive mind team members smoothly approached, exploring one area after another, occasionally harvesting some Beyonder characteristics that were beginning to gather. There are no murals. Seeing the main tomb chamber in sight, the Archbishop of the Church of the God of Steam, Horamic Haydn stopped and muttered to himself in puzzlement. Klein, who was considered half a historian, was equally puzzled. Generally speaking, a noble family member's grave would more or less express their position and honor when they were alive. And when a grave became a tomb or even a mausoleum, it was very common for a mural to be used to describe its master's life when it possessed enough space. In even older and more obscure eras, this wasn't rare, and it was even the most common method. The first thing humans learned was drawings, not writing. Thus, it really was a little strange that there were no similar murals in the tomb of a fourth epoch noble family. Upon hearing the archbishop's question, Icancer immediately ordered the men to spread out in groups of 2 to search the vicinity for relevant traces of murals. Watching from the sidelines, Klein couldn't help but want to fast forward a little to immediately see the outcome. At that moment, he noticed that the 2 machinery hive mind members in the left corner had suddenly turned into 3. One of them looked identical to Icancer Bernard, his fluffy hair propping his hat high. This. Klein was first stunned before he made a guess. The moment he had the thought, Icancer walked over to the team member closest to him. Any discoveries? He cleared his throat and lowered his voice. The team member turned around warily, but immediately relaxed when he saw that it was Deacon Icancer. No. Before he could finish his sentence, the Icancer in front of him suddenly turned into a piece of human skin and enveloped his body. The pale human skin tightly wrapped around him, and his face began to form the outline of his facial features. During this process, there were no additional sounds, nor were there any abnormal movements that were triggered. All of a sudden, the human skin began to emit rays of light, just like the rising of the sun. The human skin immediately turned translucent and quickly soared into the air as if it was being burned. A black whip immediately lashed out, striking its body, causing its movements to clearly slow down. In such a battle, slowness was an original sin. One Beyonder weapon after another, burning scrolls, and pale golden bullets were released towards the human skin. After a brilliant burst of light, countless ashes fell from the sky. All of them coruscated faint light and slowly struggled to gather together. It really is a human skin shadow. Klein turned his attention to the machinery hive mind members who had just been attacked. The man pulled at his collar and pulled out a protective charm. There were many symbols and magic labels related to the sun on it. Thankfully, the archbishop got us to wear these things. He held the lantern and sincerely praised. It was only then that Klein realized that his brooch had the quality of the night. His ring had the intensity of the storm, and his belt exuded the sense of physical strength. Although they aren't all mystical items, most of them are in the category of charms and Beyonder weapons. Even if their effects will quickly decline, they're still worth a lot. If you weren't an artisan or a rich Beyonder, there's no way to gather that much. Is this the combat style of the machinery hive mind? Burning money. Klein felt a sudden setback, and it took him a long time to recover. At that moment, the human skin shadow characteristic gathered and took form. It was like a huge diamond with countless sides reflecting light, and each side reflected a different face. The faces were densely packed, layered, and left one dizzy. I'm just short of it. Klein was overjoyed. After the machinery hive mind handled the spoils, they continued to search for the murals, but they didn't find any traces of them. They had no choice but to gather again and head for the passageway that led to the main tomb. Chapter 447. Portrait. After another series of bombardments, the passage into the main tomb was revealed to the members of the machinery hive mind. The ground was littered with debris. The diamond-shaped Beyonder characteristic that reflected a human face lay silently at the bottom of the right wall, glowing with the light of 2 other objects. The entire tunnel, including the 2 walls that lined the sides and the stone ceiling, was filled with potholes. However, one thing remained undamaged. It was a frame that was hung up ahead about 7 meters away. It was brown in color, and the wood grain was obvious, but only the side of the frame was revealed. Without anyone mentioning anything, all the Beyonders present could tell that it was strange. At this moment, the Archbishop of the Church of Steam and Machinery, Horamic Haydn, stepped forward and said in a gentle voice, "This is likely to be the spectre portrait frame that belongs to the Amon family according to the records. As long as one walks into its range and is illuminated by it, their spirit body will instantly be separated from their flesh and blood, turning into a portrait and be forever sealed inside. In this state, even if the portrait is replaced, there is no way of rescuing the person without the corresponding methods. If the duration of being sealed is too long, the body would already be dead. Then, even if one grasps the correct method to remove the seal, the spirit will quickly dissipate." As he spoke, Horamic moved forward, step by step, closing in on the strange frame. Klein was a bit worried, not daring to watch the demigod fight against the sealed artifact. But he quickly realized that he was just watching a scene provided by the magic mirror, Erodes. What was there to be afraid of? This is very normal. It's just like watching a horror movie or playing a dark game. Klein calmed himself as he quickened his pace and caught up with Horemheb Haydn. The demigod archbishop quickly reached the confines of where the mystical item that needed to be sealed was. He wore a white priest robe and a clerical cap, and his figure gradually appeared in the glass on the surface of the picture frame. Glass? Glass in the fourth epoch? Seems to be the case. There has at least been glass in the fifth epoch's history all this time, and there has been no mention of who invented it. Klein waited with great interest for the battle between the demigod and the strange sealed artifact. Horemheb's upper body fully appeared within the spectre portrait frame, but his eyes didn't lose their luster. He walked towards the frame, face to face. The silhouette within the painting flickered, as though it was constantly shrinking, yet it was unable to succeed. Horemheb stopped, took out a large almost opaque black cloth he had long prepared, and he covered the spectre portrait frame. The frame trembled a few times, but in the end, it was completely covered by the black cloth and turned silent. Horemheb seemed to be unaffected as he effortlessly removed the spectre portrait frame and finished wrapping it with the black cloth before tying a knot on its back. This isn't mystic. Didn't you say that your spirit body would be absorbed into the frame and be turned into a portrait? Why is the archbishop fine? Is this the uniqueness of a demigod, or is it because of another reason? Klein sized up Horemheb Haydn, but he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. His eyes are filled with spirit, his expression genial, and he's rich in flesh and blood. It's a pity that I'm not there in person. Otherwise, I could activate my spirit vision and have a look. Klein retracted his gaze and waited for the machinery hive mind members, such as a cancer, to come over. Horemheb handed the spectre portrait frame to a member of the team and walked towards the main tomb at the end of the passage. There was a black stone door filled with scrapes carved by blades and axes. In the middle of the door was a grayish-white disc. The surface of the disc was divided into 12 segments. There was a black needle, just like a clock from the outside world. However, the segments weren't evenly distributed across the disc. They were of varying sizes and extremely incongruous. Furthermore, each grid had half of its surface covered in a shadow. The coat of arms of the Amon family. Archbishop Horemheb made a brief introduction. He didn't explain the symbolic meaning of the coat of arms, because presently only Deacon Acancer Bernard was qualified to know. Klein, on the other hand, relied on his own knowledge of mysticism to attempt to decipher it. Disc, 12 segments and a needle. Combined together, they clearly represent time. It matches the worm of time which Amon's avatar left behind after it was wiped out. What should be 12 equal segments on a disc are unequal in size, and there's a shadow over a portion of it. Does this mean that the Amon family is the dark side of time? Then, where does their title as a blasphemer family show itself? While Klein was thinking, Archbishop Horemheb pushed open the stone door without any protection. The heavy stone door opened, revealing an extremely spacious tomb chamber. In the center of the chamber was a dais with a deep black coffin on top of it. The surrounding walls were decorated with iron lampstands, each holding a burning white candle. All the candles didn't flicker. It was so quiet that it seemed like a scene that was fixed in place, completely devoid of any signs of it suffering the effects of time that spanned 1 to 2,000 years. On the straight path from the stone door to the coffin, there were corpses lying on the ground. They were all wearing black tweed coats, half-top hats, or even ordinary worker clothes with a cap on their heads. It was obvious that they had entered in recent years. The Beyonders that previously recruited helpers? How did they get past the area at the front? The human-skinned shadow and the other monsters were clearly still alive. With a mind filled with questions, Klein looked at the corpses. What he saw left him immediately shocked. The corpses all had sparse white hair, dry and wrinkled skin, and obvious markings on their skin. They looked like 80 or 90-year-olds. There were no obvious wounds on their bodies as though they had died of old age. Furthermore, it appeared as though they had died recently and hadn't even rotted yet. It's very obvious that there wouldn't be this many aged Beyonders exploring the tomb. Even if the discoverers of the tomb were old, they would still try their best to choose the young and strong when recruiting helpers. There's something odd about it. Klein frowned and looked around again. He quickly thought of the worm of time left behind by Amon's avatar, and the coat of arms of the Amon family that represented time on the stone door. Making people age rapidly is one of the Amon family's beyonder powers? The dark side of time. The loophole in time. Could it be that as others rapidly age, the members of the Amon family would regain their youth and extend their lives? Wait a minute, for these beyonders to easily barge into this place like that, perhaps it was deliberate on the Tomb Master's part. He wanted to rob them of their time in order to maintain his own existence. Klein looked suspiciously at the black coffin on the platform. At this moment, the demigod, Horimic Haydn, raised his left hand and pressed it down. "You will stop here." "Yes, Your Grace," a Cancer and Company answered without any hesitation. As members of an official organization, they had read up on a large number of past Beyonder events. They knew that under similar circumstances, they had to obey the will of a high-sequence Beyonder, and absolutely couldn't act rashly or else they would die without knowing how. Horimic looked ahead, and his eyes fell on a picture frame that hung upside down at the bottom of the dais. His expression didn't change as he continued to walk forward at a leisurely pace. Not making any preparations at all? The hallmark of demigods is to be rash. Klein was stunned. He seemed to be able to imagine Horimic's teeth dropping, his white hair wilting, and his skin shriveling as he rapidly aged. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Horimic, who seemed fine, suddenly trembled, and a sharp and piercing grinding sound could be heard from his body. His pace began to slow down, his movements became stiff, and his skin visibly dried up. There's something wrong with that. That isn't the aging process of a normal human being. What was that grinding sound just now? Klein muttered inwardly. 4 steps, 5 steps, 6 steps. Ripping sounds came from Horimic's body as something fell to the ground. Klein subconsciously looked over and saw a gear. A gear covered in rust. Horimic continued on as items kept dropping from his body from time to time. There were rusty screws, melted wax, yellowed bones, and loose springs. His figure became increasingly thin and unsteady, as if it could collapse at any time. This is just like a robot. Well, in this era's terms, like a living doll. Klein was suddenly enlightened. He remembered that before old Neil died, he had said that the Church of Earth Mother Sequence 4 was good at alchemical life, and that the Savant Pathway's corresponding sequence was barely able to do so too. As for Horimic, he was a high-sequence Beyonder of the Savant Pathway. The Horimic in front of me isn't the real him. It's just a refined doll. Just now, the reason why the Spectre portrait frame was ineffective was that a doll doesn't have a spirit body. The real Horimic should still be far away. As expected of a demigod. Amidst Klein's enlightenment, the Archbishop walked up to the dais, bent his knees and back, and turned the upside-down frame over. Generally speaking, when exploring a tomb involving Beyonder elements, it was necessary to avoid flipping items over. But this time, Horimic had made the opposite choice. Following the flipping of the portrait frame, a wind suddenly blew in the sealed tomb, dispersing the formless imprisonment and silence. The candles on the iron-colored light fixtures rapidly ignited, becoming unusually bright. However, they soon reached the end of their lives and melted away. The old corpses on the ground rapidly rotted and stank. In just a few seconds, the tomb's main chamber had turned dark, leaving only the lanterns that the machinery hive mind members were holding onto to barely illuminate the area ahead. Horimic picked up the picture frame from the floor and went up the stairs to the dais. He came to the black coffin, stretched out his right palm, and forcefully pushed. Creak. The heavy coffin lid opened up a crack with a creaking sound, as though it wasn't nailed shut at all. Horimic looked down and said in the same unchanging voice, "There's no corpse." As the scene drew nearer, Klein saw that the coffin's interior was empty except for a pale gold cushion embroidered with a worm with 12 rings. At that moment, Horimic turned around and the picture frame in his hand was reflected in the eyes of a Cancer and the others. With just a glance, Klein's gaze suddenly froze. It was a portrait of a smiling young man. He had black eyes and black curly black hair. He had a broad forehead and a thin face. A crystal monocle hung over his eye. He wore a black pointed hat. Amon. Chapter 448. Amon's Possible Origins. Amon. Klein said the word in his mind. He had originally thought that the blasphemer who appeared in the forsaken land of the god City of Silver was a descendant of an ancient family like Amon. Through inheriting the legacy of his ancestors, step by step, he stepped into the demigod ranks. To his surprise, It was very possible that that particular person could very well have lived for more than 2,000 years and was a member of the Amon family when it was at the peak of its strength. An old antique. Why would he, for no good reason, build a tomb for himself? Did he fake his death to get out of a situation? Or is there another reason, such as leaving traces so as to have time fixed onto his body? He was able to live from the 4th epoch to the 5th epoch, all because he was siphoning the lives of others? I originally guessed that he's a sequence 3 or sequence 2. Based on what I've seen today, it's not impossible for him to be a sequence 1. After all, long periods of time would eventually bring about an intrinsic improvement. Klein switched back and forth between puzzlement and speculation. His thoughts were like boiling water, gurgling non-stop. The Horamic doll tugged at his throat and accidentally pulled off a piece of skin, revealing the complicated mechanical structure within. His voice came out from that spot and brought with it the impression of leaking air. Search the corpses on the ground. Don't come any closer. Yes, Your Grace. Icancer and company heaved a clear sigh of relief. The corpses on the ground had long since produced their beyonder characteristics. Some of them had even combined with certain parts of the body to form a terrifying mystical item. In addition, the dead carried all sorts of items on them. The machinery hive mind sure has reaped quite a harvest this time. Together with the specter portrait frame and the human skin shadow characteristic, this completely makes up for the crazy expenses of the cleanup. A huge investment for a high return. Klein's eyes lingered on the ground for quite a while. He inhaled, tore his gaze away, and followed Horamic, who didn't carry a lantern, to the wall on the other side of the coffin. At this moment, the magic mirror, a Rhodes, brightened up the scene, allowing the things in front of him to be seen clearly. Klein saw that the wall across him had become mottled due to the rapid weathering just now. Many of the murals had been destroyed and could no longer be restored to their original states. The only one that was more complete and could barely be seen clearly was a colorful mural at the top of the wall, which took up a small half of the dome. It described a towering mountain range, and on the highest mountain peak, there was a huge cross that was taller than the mountain. The cross was covered in layers of radiance, making it seem unusually holy. In front of it, a tall and domineering figure could be seen vaguely. The mountain range was like a pet that lay prostrate at its feet. This figure was surrounded by 2-winged, 4-winged, and 6-winged angels. They were holding bugles, playing harps, or playing flutes, looking pious and sprightly. At the foot of the mountain range, 2 12-winged angels were humbly walking towards the mountaintop, each holding a baby in their arms. The baby on the left had curly black hair, and the baby on the right had pale blonde hair. One of their eyes was black, the other golden. Elsewhere in the mountain range, there was a vague depiction of a giant with chains at its legs and a dragon that had its legs bound and never be able to land. Horamic first looked at the baby on the left, and his genial expression became increasingly serious. He said a word in a very low voice. Amon. Then, he turned to look at the baby on the right, and after a few seconds of silence, he said another name, Adam? Amon, Adam. As Klein repeated the names, he felt that the fog that hung over the history of the 4th epoch and the 3rd epoch was growing thicker. He combined all the information he had learned and quickly made a guess. On the mountaintop, the figure in front of the glowing cross is surrounded by angels, with giants and dragons submitting to it. It's definitely a real god that's at sequence 0. Another being who likes to partially use the cross as a symbol is the true creator. It's said that Amon is the descendant of an ancient sun god, but the one at the top of the mountain doesn't seem like a pure sun god. Could it be that he is the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, that the City of Silver believes in? This is in accordance with the legends of the City of Silver. The awakening of the Creator who stripped the King of Giants and the Dragon of Imagination and other ancient gods of their authorities. The so-called ancient sun god is actually the Lord that created everything as spoken about in the City of Silver? He may be in charge of the domains such as sun and time. In addition, the authorities of the Giant King, Ormer, and the Dragon of Imagination Ankwelt, has likely returned to him. This can no longer be completely contained within sequence 0. So the original Amon was the descendant of the City of Silver's, Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, who inherited the beyonder characteristics of the time domain? This seems to slightly explain why he remained silent in the City of Silver's dungeon for decades. Apart from him, there's also another descendant of the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, named Adam. What did Adam inherit in the beginning? Does he still have a descendant alive, And if so, where would he be? What's the relationship between the true creator and that person? Is it simply an imitation by using the creator's title and the symbol of the cross? Or is there some deeper connection between the two? Klein didn't let his doubts show too much. After all, the magic mirror, a Rhodes, could be sizing him up. Horamik stared at the mural for a while. Then he suddenly took a few steps forward and pressed his extended palms against the wall. Without a sound, the majestic mural disintegrated, turning into pieces of stone fragments that landed on the ground. Even the color quickly evaporated, disappearing without a trace. The Church of the God of Steam and Machinery is consciously concealing the history of the third and fourth epochs. Are the other churches the same? Klein frowned and followed the Horamik doll to the other side. After making a half circle, they discovered another thing. A stone door, which only had an outline, loomed in the corner. At this moment, the Horamik doll's joints were constantly creaking, but this didn't stop him from quickly approaching the stone door and reaching out with his right hand to attempt to push. Above the stone door, there was a sudden burst of aqueous light that condensed into a scene that looked so real that it seemed possible to directly touch it. Dark blue waves were surging forward, and there was a dense black mist that looked like liquid. A craggy mountain protruded from the mist, continuously flowing with viscous liquids. Behind this mountain, the black mist seemed endless, with no end in sight. There was also no limit to its depth. The deeper one looked, the more placid it felt. It was as if once something fell in, it would fall forever. What is this place? Klein's expression didn't change as he muttered inwardly. Horamik retracted his palms and watched as the scene gradually faded until it disappeared. He leaned his head back and sighed to himself while feeling perplexed. The abyss. Abyss? That's the source of all corruption. It said that it's an abyss that can even corrupt a true god? Klein was amazed, but as a former clown, he regulated his expression and limbs to appear unperturbed. He immediately thought of something. Roselle, who was exploring the fog sea, had once deviated from his path, leaving behind a puzzling sentence, "I saw the abyss." As Klein pondered about the layers of waves that were surging towards the black fog, he made a conjecture. There's an entrance to the abyss somewhere in the fog sea? Immediately after, he looked towards the stone door. He suspected that Amon, who lurked around the City of Silver, had employed a certain ritual. After finishing the tomb, he didn't depart from it normally. Instead, he used a special tunnel to head for the abyss. Thus, in the eyes of most people, he was already dead. As for whether the City of Silver or the forsaken land of the gods was located somewhere in the abyss, Klein couldn't be sure. After all, the history of this tomb was at least 1,500 years old, so Amon had plenty of time to use the abyss to go somewhere else. Would he still occasionally come back to siphon off time? If he finds out that someone has dug up his grave, the expression on his face would definitely be very marvelous. Klein rejoiced for a baffling reason. At this moment, the Horamik doll held his left hand in his right palm and abruptly twisted it. With a creaking sound, his left hand was bent at the wrist, but there were no bones that pierced out of his skin, spewing out flesh and blood. There was a heavy black metal tube inlaid in his left wrist. His entire left arm was a small-caliber mystical cannon. To hide a mole of advanced technology, he truly is worthy of being from the machinery hive mind. However, the requirements and costs for such a thing are too high. Clearly, it could only be provided to specific personnel and not for military troops. Klein felt that today was an eye-opener for him. An opportunity to see another development path in the mysterious world. The only problem is that beyond our characteristics are conserved, artisans are limited, so many things cannot be mass-produced. The Horamik doll put his left wrist against the stone door. Inside his body, the sound of gears grinding against each other as they revolved emitted an intense spirituality radiance. A ray of light that was as bright as day appeared and disappeared. The stone door suddenly turned into pure powder, as if it had never existed. He destroyed the door? If blasphemer Amon encounters an emergency situation and attempts to return here, only to find the door gone, that would be fun. Klein almost laughed when he imagined that scene. This was the end of the Amon family's tomb exploration. The scene surrounding Klein quickly shrank and became the background. An illusory, ancient, and bizarre silver mirror appeared in midair. The black, eye-like gemstones on the mirror flickered. White words were quickly outlined in the mirror. "Your loyal servant, Rhodes, has finished reporting and is ready to serve you at any time again." Klein was a bit wary and unaccustomed towards the fellow who appeared too enthusiastic. He nodded and said, "Well done, you may leave first." Yes, the mighty existence above the spirit world. As soon as Rhodes produced that line of words, the scene around him shattered into pieces. After confirming that its power had left his dream, Klein thoughtfully said to himself, "The mighty existence above the spirit world? It really has vaguely sensed the gray fog. Does this magic mirror with a wicked sense of humor really wish to rely on me, or does it have some other purpose? I have to watch carefully. Otherwise, with it at the machinery hive mind, I don't want to be repeatedly blasted with cannon fire." Rounding up his thoughts, Klein began looking forward to the next day. Chapter 449. Better choice in Empress Borough. Inside the opulent villa of Earl Hall. The cold air was kept out by the windows and walls. The building's interior was warm as though it were spring, and the fireplace was elegant. Audrey Hall was having her measurements taken by the fashion designer, Mrs. Guinea, so that she could create a costume for Audrey for the New Year banquet in consideration of her recent physical and emotional state. At this moment her personal maid, Annie, came close to her ear and whispered, "Lady Escalante is here." Such a fast response? Audrey was delighted, but she didn't make an obvious show of it on her face. With a faint smile she said, "Please get her to wait in my art studio." 5 minutes. Art studio? Annie asked in surprise. "Yes, I'd like to ask her to admire my recently completed oil painting. She says that content that is painted in a relaxed state easily allows one to express their true thoughts and emotions," Audrey explained unhurriedly. Annie suddenly felt enlightened. "Yes, Mississippi." Less than 5 minutes later, Audrey entered the studio and saw Escalante admiring the paintings on the walls. "That's Mr. Cenci's Inner Heart's Night, a masterpiece that allows one to feel peace," she smiled and introduced the painting to Escalante. Cenci's Inner Heart's Night? One of the top 10 works of last year's top 100-century-old paintings that the Tussock Times voted for. Escalante was obviously the kind of person who often read newspapers. And as a beyonder of the spectator pathway, she had a good memory. "Yes," Audrey replied simply, as though it was a trivial matter. "I actually have the honor of seeing the real deal." Escalante looked up at the painting again. She swallowed back the words, "This is worth at least a manor," unwilling to appear too Philistine. Audrey didn't continue introducing the other paintings. She found a reason to send Annie away and motioned to Susie to stand guard outside the door. Susie read her hint without any hindrance, wagged her tail and scampered out. Escalante closed the door and went back to the easel's side. Before Audrey could ask, she took the initiative and said, "We have both the human skin shadows characteristic and the wind-blessed potion formula. However, there is no need for us to sell it unless the other party is able to provide an irresistible offer. The willingness to negotiate means there's hope." Audrey's green eyes darted slightly as she asked with a chuckle, "What do you wish to receive in exchange?" Escalante stroked her hair and gave her pre-prepared answer. £2,500 for the human skin shadow characteristic, and £3,000 for the wind-blessed potion formula. Quite a huge premium. Although Audrey didn't find them expensive, she lamented the fact that the Psychology Alchemist's premium had exceeded 50%. According to the description given by the Hanged Man, under normal circumstances, the formula for sequence 6 would have cost less than £2,000, but the closer it was to a high sequence, the fewer potion formulas there were to circulate, making it very difficult to buy them. There was no normal situation, and what was even more important was that even if one chanced upon a sale, it was very difficult to ascertain their authenticity. At that moment, Escalante added, "If the other party can barter with mystical items, all that's needed is for them to be of roughly the same value. That is to say, you want mystical items more and can accept a price reduction for them. The Psychology Alchemists is one of the youngest secret organizations. They clearly haven't accumulated enough in this area compared to the others." Audrey pursed her lips and said, "I'll inform them, but I can't guarantee that they'll accept it." She wasn't the least bit worried that the Psychology Alchemist would notice that she hadn't been involved in any Beyonder gathering recently. After all, her schedule was rather tight. Afternoon tea, music lessons, dinners, dances, equestrian training, language lessons, dancing lessons, and so on. There were too many opportunities for her to interact with different people. In that case, perhaps a particular dinner was a cover for Beyonder gatherings, Or perhaps the music teacher was a senior beyonder, and it was almost impossible for the psychology alchemists, who hid in the shadows, to investigate it when they couldn't act openly. Having said this, Audrey curiously asked, Ms. Escalante, I thought you wouldn't sell the wind-blessed potion formula since it's already at sequence 6. Heh, if there's a chance, it might be more useful to spread this information out, Escalante answered vaguely. In her mind, although Miss Audrey was a new member who had a high level of importance attached to her by the organization, she was still a new member after all. There were many things she couldn't know about. Why? Audrey suppressed her doubts and smiled sweetly. She asked innocently, Ms. Escalante, if this deal succeeds, can you count it as my contribution? Escalante broke into a laugh. Yes. Klein busied all morning, until he returned to Minsk Street. He filled his stomach and prepared to rest. Only then did he have the time and opportunity to listen to prayers above the gray fog. Someone on Miss Justice's side has the human-skinned shadow characteristic? Seriously? Either it doesn't come, or it comes in pairs. As a secret organization, the Psychology Alchemists is quite qualified in the field of resources. Klein was suddenly left in the throes of happiness from having a choice. Even if he counted the £500 which the hanged man still hadn't paid him, he only had £1,335 in cash. This didn't prevent him from seriously considering the request for a deal with the Psychology Alchemists. After thinking for a dozen seconds or so, he passed Justice's words to the hanged man to see what choice the latter would make. £3,000? Alger Wilson, who was still in Rorstad Archipelago's capital, the city of generosity, felt as if someone had struck him hard. After he became captain of the Blue Avenger, he sometimes played the role of a pirate and sometimes a law enforcer, secretly exterminating several groups of pirates. But even so, the total value of his spoils of war didn't exceed £2,000, and a portion of it had to be distributed to the sailors under him. Of course, this didn't include the ships and cannons which were captured, as they had to be handed over to the Church of the Lord of Storms. This made Alger often sigh that most pirates weren't rich, that they were used to squandering on having opulent lives. Liquor, barbecue, whores, marijuana, and gambling had drained the pirates of their money. Unless I meet a pirate crew with beyonders, it would be very difficult to get rich so suddenly. Alger paced a few steps. Then he made up his mind. He took out a gold mask from his undergarment pocket. The mask had rough facial features, and the way they were formed had the characteristics of a primitive human being from an ancient forest. Alger sat down, humbly recited the honorific name of the fool, and said, I'm willing to use this mystical item to barter for the wind-blessed potion formula. As long as the user wears this mask, they will become extremely calm and emotionless. At the same time, they will also obtain an extremely strong regenerative ability, exaggerated speed, and outstanding strength, as well as grasp a certain amount of black magic and primitive curse techniques. Its weakness is that as the number of times it's used increases, the wearer will become more and more unlike a human being. They will turn colder and colder, eventually treating themselves as a god. Sitting in his seat as the fool, Klein looked at the £500 note in front of him, the 5 strands of dark blue hair as thick as a tiny snake, and the simple golden mask. He tapped the edge of the long table with his finger, thinking carefully about what mystical items he could use for a trade. The all-black eye? Certainly not. This is the main ingredient of a Sequence 5 Nimblewright Master. It's just short of having Little Sun to obtain the method to remove the mental corruption. Dark Emperor card? This card, which cannot see the light of day, has a value countless times higher than that of a human skin shadow's characteristic. Mr. Azik's copper whistle? At the moment, its only function is the summoning of a messenger, and it's an important tool for communication. I can't sell it. The copper whistle of the numinous episcopate member who left behind white feathers? Similarly, it can only summon a messenger, but the target on the other side of the messenger seems to be very dangerous. Sun brooch? This is something I want to use for myself. It effectively makes up for my weaknesses. Master key? It involves Mr. Door and has too many hidden secrets. In addition, just from the value of its effects, it pales in comparison to the human skin shadow's characteristic. Biological poison bottle? This is very compatible with my spirit body state. If I use it well, I can even fight a group of beyonders. Demon hunting bullets, purifying bullets, exorcism bullets? There are not mystical items and are considered consumable beyonder weapons. They are of very low value. The Book of Secrets? This isn't a mystical item either. The psychology alchemists likely do not lack such knowledge. At present, only the beyonder characteristic of an interrogator can be sold. However, the psychology alchemists wants mystical items. Furthermore, the trading venue is in Backland, so it would easily expose information pertaining to Hero Bandit Dark Emperor. Klein took this opportunity to sort out what he had and finally came up with a perfect plan. He first took the form of Mr. World, manipulating him to take up a praying posture, and then he responded with a hoarse voice. I accept the price of £2,500, but give me 2 days to raise the money. Immediately following that, Klein threw the reply scenes of the Hanged Man and the World to the Crimson Star, which symbolized Miss Justice. After receiving affirmation from Miss Justice, Klein waited patiently all afternoon at Minsk Street. It was late afternoon when the Machinery Hive Mind member, Carlson, rang his doorbell. Klein didn't ask anything further. He followed the man to the Lever Cathedral near the West Balham Dock and entered a 3-story building next to the cathedral. The signboard wrote, Backland Institute for Mechanical Research. How academic. Klein suddenly thought of the Blackthorn Security Company and cracked the corner of his lips into a smile. Under Carlson's guidance, he passed through some strange devices and found himself in a windowless room. On the long table in the room, there were many items emitting strong spirituality, including the human skin shadow characteristic and the spectre portrait frame which was covered in black cloth. However, there were no characteristics left behind by the dead beyonders. Obviously, the higher-ups of the Machinery Hive Mind don't want me to know about the law of indestructibility and conservation. Klein wasn't the least bit surprised. You can choose one. The hatless Acancer pointed at the long table. Klein scrutinized the items several times before sighing. There's nothing I want. If I were to convert it into gold, how much would I get? He had already made up his mind that he wouldn't obtain the human skin shadows characteristic from the Machinery Hive Mind. Although this could be explained as the need to create some mystical item or to try out a unique ritualistic magic, there was still a chance of exposing his own sequence. In a situation where there was a better choice, Klein didn't want to take the risk. Thus, he intended to take only money. Not only would this help him gather the £2,500 that the psychology alchemists quoted, but he could also effectively dispel the Machinery Hive Mind's wariness towards him. Acancer was visibly relieved. He smoothed his hair and answered with a smile, £1,500. However, we encourage you to choose money, so a total of £2,000. Klein immediately revealed a sincere smile. All right. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.